Hey everyone, it's your buddy back again with another exciting fanfic, which is what if Naruto built a legendary harem with village beauties Hinata, Tenten and Hanabi, part 3. If you enjoy this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more fanfics like this. Now, let's dive right into the fanfic. Tamari sat lividly in the waiting room next to the room where surgery upon the young Namikaze was taking place. Her knees shook nervously, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't get them to stop. Her hands were held within one another in a bone-white grip as the blonde-haired girl replayed the events over in her head, and each time she had come up with the same conclusion. The third Hokage had allowed her to wait to see how Naruto's operation went. Despite some argument from some of the other ninjas, he held no animosity towards the Suna girl, believing she had nothing to do with it. Also, one of his reasonings to help quell the fury of some of the shinobi, including one furious Anko, was that if Naruto hadn't pulled Tamari out of the way, she would have been right in the line of fire. It was possible that they had intended to go straight through her as to have the element of surprise when attacking Naruto. Tamari had reached the same realization: she had been the bait. Knowing that her father had sent her somewhere where she was expected to have not come back in one piece, let alone alive, brought tears to her eyes, and for the first time since her mother died she cried. If either of her brothers saw her current state, she knew at least one would show emotion, the other never so much as blinked in surprise. She knew that she would probably never see either of them again now. Going home if Naruto died because of her would cause her to suffer a great burden, one she would never wish to carry. The alternative, if he were to survive and then she returned, would possibly result in banishment from her father for not completing the mission despite not knowing about it. He was cruel like that. What sounded like a stampede echoed through the hallway, causing Tamari to turn her head and find several young women charging towards the emergency room. One of them she recognized as the shinobi which had tried to attack the men who had stabbed Naruto but hadn't been able to reach them before they all took cyanide pills, instantly ending their lives. As they got close, Tamari stood up from her seat and wiped the tears from her eyes as they slowed down. She could instantly tell by the looks in their eyes that they wanted answers, and if they weren't the right ones, blood would be spilled. As she opened her mouth to speak, the doors behind her opened slowly to reveal a doctor walked towards him, a light coat of blood covering his usually white outfit. "Are you all waiting for Naruto?" he asked, causing them all to nod vigorously. When the girls from Konoha saw Tamari nodding, their questions increased in number but decided to press it later, preferably when they weren't in a public place. "We have managed to stabilize him, but many of his organs were damaged by the blades. He will need several weeks of treatments in order to ensure everything is working properly, but I have to say that it is a miracle that he survived. Either that or he is a demon in disguise," he concluded with a light chuckle which confused the girls lightly. An idea popped into Tamari's head, but she brushed it aside momentarily. It was far-fetched, but it wasn't impossible. "Now if you excuse me, the operation is still in progress. I simply came out here to tell you all of his current condition," he said before turning around and stepping back into the operating theater. Tamari released a breath she didn't know she had been holding before turning around and seeing the girls doing the same. "Is there anywhere we can talk in private? I believe an explanation is in order," she said, causing the eyes of the others to lock on her. "Come on, my new place ain't too far from here, we can talk there," said Anko, a slight hint of venom in her voice which went mildly undetected. She turned and began walking away. Hana and Ino quickly followed her, Sakura opting to walk alongside Tamari if only to keep an eye on the Sand Princess, her fingers resting hidden on a blunted kunai. Tenten and Hinata stayed behind momentarily. "I'm going to stay here," announced Hinata, saying her intentions. "I want to be there when Naruto-kun wakes up." "You know that may not be for several days," said Tenten, hating the words coming out her mouth. She had noticed the increase in stuttering Hinata had just done. The only other time she had done so was when Naruto had gone missing. Hinata nodded in understanding, opting to sit in the spot Tamari had occupied a little earlier. "I'll tell you what happened later," said Tenten before turning to run off towards the empty hallway, intent on catching up to her friends. As Tenten turned around the corner, she suddenly felt very alone, despite there being numerous people in the nearby corridors. She felt her legs shake uncontrollably, and she pulled her knees to her chest and hugged her shins as tears swelled in her eyes. "Naruto-kun," she whispered as a single tear rolled down her cheek. I need you to look after him, said Sarutobi sternly, his voice radiating with power yet with the kindness of a grandfather. After what had transpired earlier, he had come to the conclusion that if it had not been Suna acting, Naruto was now vulnerable. He was surprised that the demon held within him hadn't begun healing him itself, but it had to have helped him sense the hostile intentions of the Sand Shinobi. He had himself sensed the danger present but hadn't been able to act in time, neither had any of the shinobi present. By the time any of them had gotten out of their stupor, the assassins had already ended their own lives. It had been a suicide mission, they had never been expected to come back home alive. That left Naruto in the hospital and in danger. It was no secret that there were those in the hospital who had tried to poison Naruto when he was but a boy, and now there would be no exception. There were those he feared would use this opportunity for their own purposes, some of which he believed were coming directly from the Uchiha clan. When Naruto had been stabbed, he noticed a small smirk spread across Fugaku's face before he had tried to hide it, but it was clear that he had enjoyed watching Naruto get struck through. He had no evidence as to what he had saw and as such couldn't act on it, but he had to be wary. There was also the potential Danzo would act. The elderly war hawk still had the mind of a ruthless army general and as such would already be thinking of a way to use this to his advantage. As such, he had to take drastic measures. I want you to stay by his side at all times. While I would like to believe otherwise, he is not safe within the hospital walls, said the Hokage addressing the Anbu in front of him. The man simply nodded, no sound being made from underneath the mask, with a lightning bolt spread across it and two orange lines under his eyes. He vanished instantly, a swirl of leaves marking that he had been there in the first place. Hinata gasped as the man had appeared next to her as if out of thin air. She recognized him as the Anbu that had accompanied them on their way to Naruto's mother's grave, and she relaxed slightly. He looked down at her, Hinata becoming slightly intimidated by the man. Do not worry, I'll look after him like a father would a son, he said kindly, although Hinata was startled slightly simply by the fact that he had talked at all. That's good to know, said Hinata, her eyes glued to the eye holes, staring into them hoping to see any sign of the man's eyes but could only see darkness. Not another word was said as Hinata sat in silence awkwardly while the Anbu stood in the silence he was accustomed to. The silence was deafening as Temari sat awkwardly, the eyes of 5 girls lined directly on her, taking in the words the Sand Woman had said. Ino and Sakura shared a look between one another, playing it over in their mind. I guess it makes sense somewhat, said Sakura, eyeing the blonde-haired girl who shrugged in response. You were there, weren't you, Anko? Asked Tenten, looking at the eldest one there. What do you reckon happened? Well, said Anko, draping an arm around Hana's shoulder, causing the Inuzuka girl to yip lightly. I do have to say she seemed genuine when greeting Naruto, and I did see the look of confusion which was apparent right before Naruto pulled her out of the way. At the moment, I have to say she is trustworthy. Temari released a breath she had been holding as the atmosphere in the room seemed to lighten dramatically. She felt a hand on her shoulder and looked up to see Anko staring her straight in the eyes with snake-like slits. We've given you this chance, I suggest you don't waste it, she threatened, causing Temari to nod vigorously. Anko smiled as she leant back, looking down at the blonde girl. Now, after that little incident that was pulled by your cronies, it is safe to say that your marriage contract is now void, seeing as it was all a ruse. Be that as it may, said Temari, I may have only recently met Naruto, but the kindness he showed me today is more than I ever received from my brothers or father. I owe him my life, and if he wishes I serve him on hands and knees, I shall do so willingly. I have no home to go back to as far as I'm concerned. You've been through so much in such little time, said Hana, walking forward and embracing the girl in a hug, pressing her head against her bosoms. Tenten, Ino and Sakura giggled lightly as Temari flailed around. They too had to face the terror which was Hana's breath hugs. As Hana released her hold and allowing Temari to breathe freely, she too giggled lightly. She knew she lightly suffocated them, but that was the way she showed affection, she wasn't going to change it. Temari stood up, almost at equal height to Hana despite being a year younger. See, could I have another hug, a proper one? She asked, sounding slightly embarrassed for the first time since the girls met her. Hana smiled as she complied, lightly wrapping arms around Temari's torso and pulling her gently closer, allowing the girl's head to rest on her shoulder. Temari could feel her own breast being pulled into Hana's but ignored the feeling as she felt several other sets of arms wrap around her as the other girls made it a group hug. "Thank you," she whispered, crying in happiness for the first time in her life. Enko was the only one not in the middle of the hug, opting to walk out onto the balcony instead. She was withheld from doing anything more than trusting the young girl at some point. She recalled how she had been used in a familiar fashion many years prior and how those memories still haunted her to this day. If Temari was lucky, she'd have those girls around her as lifelong friends who would help her forget her pain. Enko wished she could just forget her own suffering, but it had already become a part of her so deep that the loss of the mental wounds would do more damage than good. Her grip on the railing tightened as she wondered if she would have ever turned out as cheerful as those other girls if the snake bastard had never come into her life. The day he had betrayed her, she had lost everything but her life, and several times she thought of taking that herself. Had it not been for her meeting Naruto that fateful night, her life may never have taken a turn for the better. "Naruto, I lost you for 5 months, she whispered into the dusk as the sun began to set. "If I lost you again." She couldn't finish her sentence as she burst into silent tears. "Thank you," said Hiashi, taking his sleeping daughter from the Anbu's arms. Naruto had come out of intensive surgery just before the sunset, and staying true to her word, Hinata hadn't left his side, staying well after visiting hours. Eventually she had fallen asleep with worry, causing the Anbu to create a shadow clone to take the Hyuga princess back to her home. The clone simply nodded in response before leaping away to a safe distance and expelling himself, transferring his memories back to the original. The Anbu made no movement as he took the brief moments into play, visualizing them briefly before looking out the window. In the distance several storm clouds could be seen, bolts of light illuminating the dark sky. This could be seen as foreshadowing, but as far as he was concerned the darkest moment of the day had already occurred, only a select few possibilities could be worse. Naruto was now on life support and in a steady condition, but he couldn't help but feel like something tragic was about to occur. Sarutobi stood in front of the memorial stone, a few droplets of water the first sign of rain hitting the brim of his Hokage hat. He had come alone, simply wanting to give himself time to think. The wise man hadn't moved for several minutes, wondering if the worst-case scenario were to happen, whether or not the council would permit him to place Naruto's name next to his father with his hereditary title. The sound of footsteps behind him caused him to turn around swiftly, his eyes locking onto Fugaku Uchiha. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" asked Sarutobi, sensing the presence of several other people hidden within the trees. Fugaku said nothing as he looked up from the ground, his eyes locking on the Hokage. Within a split second he had leapt forth, his eyes changing color as the Sharingan burst into life. "You're home early, Mum," said Sakura as Yukihiro stepped through the door. "Well, the meeting was over quickly," she explained. "I don't want you going out today. Something terrible happened last night and I don't want you getting in the way." "What happened?" asked Sakura. "Don't worry about it," said Yukihiro. "There was one other announcement made, and because of it I'm in a good mood. How about I cook you some pancakes?" The young pink-haired girl became very scared. "What's going on?" asked Temari, looking out the window of Anko's apartment. Having been the most senior of the group, Anko had offered Temari her place to stay the night. The girl accepted more from fear of declining than anything else. "I have no idea, but if someone's not dead they're going to regret waking me up," growled Anko as she was getting changed into her outfit. Temari turned towards the woman just as she was pulling her tight mesh shirt over her breast, and she accidentally caught a glimpse of something she hadn't want to. Before her cheeks gained the opportunity to flush, there was a loud explosion as the door was blown off its hinges, the wooden block heading straight at Temari. Only Anko's quick perception allowed her to leap forward, grabbing Temari and pulling her out of the way. Temari squealed in light pain as her head bounced off the floorboards, Anko landing on top of the younger girl. Anko turned her head towards where the door had once been to see a couple of Uchiha Jonin walk in, armed to the teeth, their Sharingan eyes already activated. "What's the meaning of this?" Anko shouted, infuriated. "We're not here for you, snake bitch," shouted one of them threateningly. We're here for the piece of shit underneath you. At being called a snake bitch, Anko growled angrily, wishing she had finished getting dressed so she had a kunai to throw at the bastard. When she realized they were after Tamari, however, she protectively stood up in front of her. What the hell do you guys want with her? That's none of your concern, you whore. Get out the way, said the second one, sneering slightly. Leave her alone, it's me you want, said Tamari from the ground, not knowing where she was finding this piece of courage. Listen to the brat bitch if you know what's good for you, threatened the first Uchiha. Anko was about to retaliate when she felt Tamari's hand on her shoulder. I'll be fine, said Tamari, trying to sound confident, but it didn't work too well. Anko's shoulders dropped in defeat, knowing that if she did anything more she could be arrested due to striking out against a fellow ninja of the Leaf and a member of the Konoha police force. With how she was already liked within the town by the general populace, the outcome did not look pretty. At least one of you two has some brains, smirked the second Uchiha as Tamari walked up to them. Anko's fist clenched tightly as she listened to the three of them walking away, knowing that there wasn't anything she could do about it. The town was in a panic. To a visitor it was clear that something had gone haywire and everyone was trying to figure out what had happened. Hinata walked through the hallways of the hospital nervously as doctors and nurses rushed back and forth. All she knew was that the council had met extremely early in the morning and their decision had left many wondering what the higher-ups weren't telling them. Hinata had left home before her father had come back, unaware that had he made it back the news he would have told her would have been devastating. A scream of pain was heard from a nearby room and Hinata squealed lightly as a man was dragged out on a stretcher. She immediately recognized the clothing as that of the Uchiha clan and she couldn't help but be scared. She made her way into Naruto's room to find the same Anbu still on guard. She didn't know whether or not they had had any sleep, but she wasn't going to be the one to ask. Hello there, she said timidly, the Anbu nodding in response. Nervously she took her seat by the bed and grabbed Naruto's hand and held it. She sat there in silence as hospital staff hurried back and forth between rooms. After a time had passed, she turned to the Anbu. Do you know what happened? Apparently the sand attacked. The ruse yesterday was a distraction or so everyone's been saying, said the Anbu nonchalantly. I haven't heard much more, but I know something isn't right. It's not. Hinata's head turned quickly as she felt Naruto's hand grip hers tightly. With his spare hand he took off the mask from his mouth and nose, allowing him to breathe proper air again. His eyes opened slowly, and he turned his head to look at Hinata and the Anbu behind her. Naruto-kun, said Hinata, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. Let's hear it, said the Anbu, his expression unknown due to his mask. Why would they target me? Asked Naruto, his voice sounding soft and weak. Those ninjas could have attacked the Hokage or any of the clan leaders that were there, but why me? Don't worry though, I won't die this easily. Don't worry about it, Naruto-kun, said Hinata happily. Neither of the two children could see the look of sadness on the Anbu's face. Should I be relieved or distraught that he doesn't know what he holds, he thought. Wait a minute, what he holds? I see. Seems my mission is not yet complete. It's so good you're alright, Naruto-kun, said Hinata. Everyone will be so happy. Not everyone, said a voice from the door. Hinata turned sharply, shocked momentarily by this new person being followed by a handful of Anbu and Jonin-ranked Uchiha shinobi. What do you want, Fugaku? Asked Naruto, eyeing off the elder Uchiha. There were several cuts and bruises on the elder man's face, but Naruto paid it no attention. I've told you before, the scrolls belong to my father, I'm not giving them to you. I'm not telling you as the leader of the Uchiha clan, said Fugaku, earning a few raised eyebrows. I'm commanding you as the new Hokage. There was silence as the three people came to grips what had happened. Hinata's hands shot to her face and covered her mouth in horror. Old man, said Naruto lightly under his breath, his grip on his sheets tightened as hard as he could with anger. The Anbu made no motions, as if he had half expected this bombshell. What happened? Asked Naruto, eyes gazing directly at Fugaku. The sand attacked last night, catching the Hokage off guard while he was mourning by himself down at the memorial stone. Thankfully, my son had been nearby and alerted us of the situation. By the time we got there, the third was fighting a losing battle. We fought bravely, but the Sandame's wounds were too great. We lost a great number of our clan pushing them back, and many more were injured. There was momentary silence, both the Anbu and Naruto picking up the fact that it sounded well rehearsed. Now do as I say, Q. Fugaku was cut off as the Anbu leapt into action, kunai in hand, blood dripping off the side of the blade. Fugaku stood there shocked, placing his hand on his bleeding cheek. For breaking the Sandame's law, you are to be sentenced to death, said the Anbu sternly, anger in his voice. Kill him, shouted Fugaku, pointing an angry finger at the Anbu that struck him. The Anbu leapt backwards, gracefully escaping through the hospital window as the Uchiha and Anbu followed him. Fugaku roared in fury as he too leapt out the window, prepared to slaughter the one who had marked his face. All of this happened in a few seconds, which left three people incredibly confused. Hinata and Naruto looked at one another, bewilderment clear on their faces. Meanwhile, Kakashi, who had been reading a chapter of his favorite book underneath Naruto's bedside window, had been showered in glass as ninjas flew over the top of him. He stood up, his head peering through the broken window. What just happened? He asked the two young children to see that they were in the same boat as him. Metal clashed with metal as the shinobi leapt across the rooftops, a number of Anbu and Uchiha striking out against the masked attacker. The Anbu with lighting across his face was able to glance every blow that came his way, skillfully using only the kunai in his right hand. Fugaku was close behind the main group, shouting orders angrily. Use only taijutsu and weapons, anything else could hurt those below he yelled, knowing if they did anything which could hurt the populace his time as Hokage would be incredibly short. All of the ninjas following his instruction nodded, the Uchiha activating their Sharingan as they continued on the offensive. In a move that would make Might Guy proud, the hunted Anbu landed on a rooftop and twisted around, his leg rising in the air and unleashing a roundhouse kick at the unsuspecting Uchiha. Despite having seen the move coming, he was in no position to do anything but put up a feeble block attempt. The force of the kick knocked the man off his line, the Uchiha skidding across the roof tiles before his back hit a chimney. The Anbu was not done yet as he held his fingers together in a distinctive pose. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, he said, causing half a dozen clones to appear, each armed with a kunai. The ensuing battle was mighty as the clones danced a deadly battle with their opponents, each person being mained up in a one-on-one battle. Despite the clones splitting up the original strength into equal portions, they were still able to fight on equal ground with Fugaku's men, something which infuriated the Hokage. The strongest Uchiha attacked the original man, the one who hadn't moved since initializing the technique. He brought a kunai down at the masked man, who reached out and grabbed the extended appendage. Twisting around, the Anbu tossed Fugaku over his shoulder and into the air before tossing his kunai at him in one swift motion. Only because of his eyes was Fugaku able to deflect the metal blade before tossing his own at the man. Instead of leaping to the side like Fugaku expected, the man leapt at him and in doing so into the path of the kunai. In a fluid motion, the man twisted in midair, turning a full 360 degrees with an outstretched hand which caught the kunai despite the pace it had been going. Fugaku growled in annoyance as he began his descent, throwing several airborne kicks and punches at the masked shinobi. The two skilled men fought evenly through the air until Fugaku was able to break through the man's defenses, delivering an axe kick to the man's shoulder. The man dropped like a boulder and Fugaku smiled as he landed gently on the roof while the man had crashed into the tiles, a small cloud of dust blocking the Uchiha's view. That would be the crucial mistake as the smoke began to clear, showing the Anbu in the middle of performing a hand seal. Did he deliberately take the hit so I couldn't see him? Thought Fugaku as the Anbu performed the final seal before pulling his right arm back. Futon Senpuken, shouted the Anbu driving his fist forward, a hurricane bursting from the velocity of his arm. Fugaku's eyes widened slightly as he saw the torrent of wind rushing towards him and in an act of desperation dropped into the alleyway behind where he was standing. By the time he leapt back onto the roof, the Anbu had gone. Are you all right, father? Asked a voice near him, causing Fugaku to turn around and see Itachi standing nearby. Why didn't you help? Asked Fugaku, boiling with rage. I thought with your title of the strongest ninja in the village you would be alright, said Itachi, his facial expression unwavering. What about last night then? asked Fugaku, his voice only just carrying to his eldest son. I didn't wish to choose between the village and the clan, said Itachi before he turned and leapt away, leaving his father as the Anbu and Uchiha who had been fighting the clones came to him, reporting that the clones had dispersed. What do you want us to do, sir? Asked one of the Anbu. Issue an arrest warrant for that man, see that he is captured immediately, I want his head on a platter, said Fugaku easing into his calm demeanor. As for the brat, you know what to do. The Uchiha and Anbu nodded in succession before leaping into action, each with their own missions to accomplish. Fugaku stood there for a while, knowing that there were several things to fix, including the attitude of his own son. Hinata-chan, said Naruto in his hospital bed to the Hyuga girl once both had calmed down from the morning's events. The young girl looked at him, curious to know what he wanted. Go to my home, there is something there you need to see. But Naruto-kun, I can't get into your place, the S-seal won't let me, said Hinata. Take Sakura-chan with you, she can get in, you need to do it now, said Naruto. He looked at Hinata who held onto his hand tightly, unwilling to let go. Please Hinata-chan. Hinata nodded, slowly releasing his hand. Standing up, she stumbled slightly, before walking out the door. Naruto sighed and waited a few moments for the sound of Hinata's footsteps to meld into the sound of the hospital. He looked at the window to see two Uchiha Jonin shinobi standing there. Thanks for waiting. You made it easier for us, one said, no emotion in their voice. So what do you guys want? Asked Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto, you are under arrest. Lady Hinata, said a Hyuga of the branch family, spotting the eldest daughter of Hiyashi running through the street. Your father needs to see you immediately. But I need to see my friend, shouted Hinata as the branch member began to drag her through the streets. I'm sorry Lady Hinata, I'm only following the orders given, she explained, not allowing Hinata to get another word in. Why are you happy Sasuke? Asked Itachi as he looked at his younger brother. Because father was named the Hokage, said Sasuke, a broad smile on his face. That means that we're the sons of the strongest man in the village. Our ancestors would be so proud. Itachi frowned slightly at this last statement. Sasuke didn't know how their father had come into power while he had been there the previous night. He had been unwilling to help either side, opting to betray neither his family nor the village. Now he was wondering if he should have sided with what his heart had been telling him. He might not be the strongest, politics may have had some play in it, he said, the person whom his father had fought earlier showing that there were those in the village who could equal his power, perhaps even surpass it. That's not to say that Fugaku was weak, he had fought against the strongest in the village not even a day earlier, a battle of that magnitude would severely weaken a man. However, Itachi was still not convinced. What do you mean brother? Asked Sasuke, curious as to what Itachi was saying. It's nothing you should concern yourself with, don't worry about it, said Itachi smiling. Sasuke nodded nervously, unsure if he should question his father about what his brother had said or not. The Anbu sighed as he took his mask off, knowing that it would be foolish to charge into anywhere without prior knowledge of what could happen. He knew where he had to go and what he had to do, but after making only half a dozen cage buncheons the wind had been knocked out of him. At this rate, it was possible that he wouldn't be able to help him. He began taking off his gear, allowing the cool breeze to sweep through the forest. Training Ground 44, otherwise known as the Forest of Death, he knew that he would be safe here. There was the odd ability that someone would actually come here to train, but unless they were at least Jonin rank he would be able to easily avoid them. Thankfully, he wouldn't need to go into town for food, being a survival expert he would simply live off the food and water available to him in the forest. He just had to bide his time. He couldn't go into town with his Anbu mask on, no doubt every ninja would now have a kill on sight order on him. However, going in without a mask at all would cause even more of a panic, one which would not have been seen since the night of the Kyuubi attack. He couldn't afford any more skirmishes, unlike most ninja, he would not heal at a normal rate, it was possible that he wouldn't heal at all. Such was the curse of living without a soul. He knew time was short, he had to wait for the opportune moment. He bent down at a nearby pond and scooped some water into his mouth, allowing the liquid to flow down his throat. He looked at the water at his reflection, the face of the Yondaime looking back at him. Anko watched nervously from the rooftops at the people rushing around below her. While not as hectic as before, now it just seemed to be people gossiping with one another, spreading rumors while not knowing the facts. "What are you doing up here?" asked Hana as she leapt up beside the snake mistress. "It's weird, so much has happened in so little time," analyzed Anko, not even looking at the young Inuzuka. "It's not natural. Well, if what my mother told me is true, Sarutobi was assassinated last night and Fugaku Uchiha has been named the next Hokage, although it won't be officially announced for another couple of days," said Hana. "What I'm wondering is why the Uchiha and not someone like the Hyuga. Surely they would have been a more likely choice. Even the old war hawk Danzo would make a strong leader," said Anko as she rested her chin no her fist. "No doubt there would have been some subtle deals made when nobody was paying attention." "That's politics," said Hana with a sigh. "I just got this really bad feeling though," said Anko, causing Hana to look at her strangely. "It's as if this is only the beginning." "Don't say scary stuff like that," whined Hana, as she waved her hand back and forth lightly. "Yay, I'm probably overreacting," said Anko as she stretched back and draped an arm over Hana's shoulder. This would have been normal except for the fact that her fingertips gently scraped the tip of Hana's breast, causing her to moan slightly. "Now what say you and I go down to the park and play?" Before Hana could respond, Anko bit her lightly on the ear before running off, leaping over rooftops, Hana yelling vicious words as she gave chase. However, she had no way of knowing that Anko had only been doing that to take her mind off of what had happened earlier that morning. Tamari had crawled up into a protective ball, sitting in the back corner of the cell with her knees pressed against her chest. She hated this feeling: isolation, loneliness, the betrayal from her own family, and now to be locked up in a dungeon. She had been taken to the interrogation department to be locked up with all of the criminals of the shinobi world. Even being guided down the path, she had felt the cold bloodthirsty eyes of hardened criminals staring at her as if she was a piece of meat. Thankfully, she hadn't been tossed into a cell with anybody else. Even from here she could hear them calling out to her, telling her to come play. She pressed her hands over her ears, trying to drown out their cat calls and insults. Tears swelled up in her eyes and she was afraid to open them in the fear that somebody was going to take what should never be taken away from her. The gate opened and she looked up startled, fearing the worst. The last thing she had been expecting was for Naruto to be tossed into the cell, the door locking behind him. "Naruto," she said, leaping up to her feet and embracing her fellow blonde in a hug. Hey, it's all right, Tamari," said Naruto as the young girl began to cry onto his shoulder. He could feel her breath pushing against his chest and blushed slightly at the thought but made no motion to push her away. Eventually she released her hold, stepping back only a couple of feet to look him in the eyes. "Why are you here?" she said, fear still evident in her voice. "Probably same reason as you," said Naruto humbly. "I can explain exactly why you're here," said a voice from behind, causing Naruto to turn around and see the face of Fugaku Uchiha staring straight back at him. The Hokage wasn't surrounded by the usual squad of Anbu they were required to have. Rather, he had preferred to have several of the elite Jonin of the Uchiha clan, including his own son Itachi. Naruto gleamed over them quickly, and while most of them didn't so much as have an expression on their face, Itachi seemed to have a disappointed scowl, as if he wanted no part in this. "It's pretty hard for me to let you into my mansion when you've got me locked up," said Naruto with a cheeky smirk, earning him a swift backhand to the cheek which knocked him to the ground. "Naruto!" cried Tamari as she helped Naruto to sit up, staring daggers at Fugaku. Naruto remained silent as he spat into the corner of the room, blood mixing with saliva. "You happy?" he asked, knowing that he would receive another blow. A kick to the midsection proved his theory correct as he was sent flying into the wall. "Stop it!" screamed Tamari, once again on the verge of tears. Fugaku sent a glare down at her and raised his hand up high. "That's enough, father," said Itachi, stepping in. Fugaku turned his head, his fist still raised in the air. "We came here to talk, not fight children." Fugaku sighed as he lowered his fist, Tamari cowering at his feet. "You're lucky, bitch," he said with a snarl. Clearly he had been having fun. He then turned to one of the Jonin Uchiha behind him. You know what to do, preferably one which causes minimal pain. What was that? Asked Tamari, looking at the Uchiha before everything became a blur. Her eyes snapped open, focused, and she looked around wildly, the Uchiha having vanished. Where'd everybody go? She said, looking around frantically. Her eyes finally fell onto the back corner of the room where Naruto was standing, struggling to remain on his feet. Tamari, he said weakly before a burst of blood escaped his lips and he collapsed on the ground. Naruto, she screamed, rushing over to aid, tending to his wounds to the best of her ability. She tried to make him comfortable as she looked around frantically for a cloth to wipe his forehead, which had started to burn up as if her had a fever. What's wrong? She stated as she began to wipe the sweat of his brow with her sleeve. I don't know, he said in a whisper, his voice barely strong enough to carry to her ears. Stay with me, Naruto, stay with me, she said as she cradled his head in her lap. However, everything seemed to warp before she found herself holding nothing. What just happened? She asked, confused, looking around as if she was lost. Near the entrance she saw Naruto standing unharmed next to where the head Uchiha was standing. These kind gentlemen and I have come to an agreement, said Naruto, but Tamari could tell something was wrong by the tone of his voice. What type of agreement? Asked Tamari, pushing the fact that Naruto was no longer dying in her arms to the side momentarily. The good news is, I just signed an agreement that allows you stay in Konoha as a permanent resident, said Naruto, looking at her with a weak smile. What's the bad news? You don't want to know, said Naruto as Itachi walked up to Tamari. I'll escort you out of here, he said without any emotion in his voice. But, said Tamari, but she was cut short as Itachi closed the distance between them. I'll tell you everything shortly, he said in no more than a whisper. Tamari didn't say anything in response, opting to nod her head slightly instead. Itachi stepped back, looking her directly in the eye. Come on, we haven't got all day, he said in a commanding voice. All right, said Tamari, bowing her head, trying to play the part to the best of her ability. Our business is done, said Fugaku, turning away from Naruto and walking out of the cell, following the rest of his clan. Naruto, said Tamari, diverging from the path and engulfing the young blonde in a hug. I'm scared. Don't be, he said reassuringly. Find Anko and stay by her side. All right, she said, releasing her hold, following Itachi. Just before she was about to leave the cell, however, she stopped, her eyes closed with her head bowed. What's the hold up? Said Fugaku, annoyed with impatience. Tamari turned on her heel and ran directly at Naruto, the young Namikaze having no idea what was going on before he felt her lips pressed against his. In his shock, his lips parted slightly and Tamari's tongue forced its way through, dancing its way past his teeth to play with its partner. A few seconds passed before she released the kiss, a small trail of saliva still was connecting the two tongues. You saved my life, something I will remember always, she said, fighting back tears. Naruto wasn't able to communicate back and simply stood as Tamari turned away and ran out of the cell and into line before the Uchiha clan, Itachi closing the door behind her. I'll keep her safe, he said sternly, snapping Naruto out of his stupor. Cheers, he said weakly before running up to the cage. How long do I have? About 24 hours, answered Itachi solemnly. Tenten stood by her usual target post, a kunai in each hand. She inhaled deeply before tossing both weapons simultaneously, however only one managed to successfully hit the target, the other merely skimmed the side. She sighed in defeat, somehow she just wasn't able to get the right momentum for training today. Part of her wanted to go see Naruto and spend some quality one-on-one time with him, but was afraid that somebody else might already be there. Did she really want to ruin any chance somebody else had of being alone with him? Hell yeah, she said, voicing her opinions out loud. Unfortunately, with all the panic going around town, her father had instructed her to stay at home today. However, that didn't mean that she couldn't go tonight. Please, tell me everything, said Tamari as she entered Anko's apartment with Itachi. The young Uchiha had insisted taking Tamari home by himself, something which seemed to irk Fugaku slightly, but the clan head made no notion of saying no to his son. Well, do you know what a genjutsu is? He asked. I have had 2 years ninja training, I know what they are, she said. So I was put under a genjutsu while you guys talked about something important. While she may have known about the concept of a genjutsu, that had been the first time she had ever been put under one. More or less, now do you want me to tell you the summarized version or the full version? Asked Itachi. Full, she said sternly. Well, it went like this, began Itachi, recollecting the story. What have you done to her? Said Naruto angrily as he stared down the Uchiha clan. It's a weak genjutsu, nothing to be afraid of, said Fugaku in a matter-of-speaking tone. Naruto's fist clenched as he began running through the ideal hand signs in his mind. However, if you so much as attack us, the level of the genjutsu will be so severe that if her mind doesn't collapse she will be in complete agony for the rest of her life. Naruto didn't know if it was a solid bluff or not but opted not to risk it, dropping his hand to his side. So what do you want? He asked, lightly seething in anger. Fugaku smirked as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sheet of paper and a pen. Read it, he said, offering the parchment to Naruto. Naruto's eyes widened as he pushed himself away from the wall and walked towards Fugaku, a slight limp in his step. In a swift motion, he had taken the parchment and began to read. It was then that he came to a slight hiccup. I can't read half of this, he admitted. With a groan of annoyance, Fugaku took the paper back. I'm an 8-year-old kid, I'm not that smart, damn it. Smart enough to best my son in a fight, said Fugaku, causing the other Uchiha there to look at him suspiciously. They had no knowledge of this fact, probably due to Fugaku not wanting to let it out. Itachi let out a quick smirk but covered it quickly, knowing how much Sasuke's loss would have hurt his father's pride. It states, I, Uzumaki Naruto, admit to being part of the assassination of the third Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen. I would never do anything like that, said Naruto out loud. Just listen, you piece of shit, said Fugaku before composing himself and continuing. The reason that I survived the initial attack in front of the heads of clan, including the fallen Hokage, was because I was a distraction. With a majority of ninja present at the time, the plan was for a vast number of sand nin to sneak in while the attack occurred, a perfect distraction. This whole scheme was planned out while I sought refuge in the Yondaime's mansion and I sent several notes back and forth with the cage. As such, I now accept whatever punishment is given to me as I have been caught committing high treason. Signed Uzumaki Naruto. In actuality it's a lot more complex than that, but that's the general sense of it. All I need is your signature, boy, and this document becomes official. Why would I sign some stupid fake form like that? Exclaimed Naruto, furious at the suggestion. He hadn't minded the fact that it hadn't been his father's name. He didn't believe Fugaku was the kind of person to give him such an honor as using the fourth's name. If you don't, then the blame ultimately falls on her, said Fugaku, pointing a finger at Temari, who was still caught in the genjutsu. Naruto stepped back slightly at this turn of events as he looked at Temari. What's the punishment for high treason? He asked, his voice low. Execution, said Fugaku, and that single word decided everything. Naruto turned his head towards Fugaku and stepped forward, grabbing the paper out of his hand along with the pen. Before I sign this, I have one request, said Naruto, looking at Fugaku with cold eyes. What is it? Asked Fugaku, wanting to hear the final request of a child. Naruto pointed a finger at Temari. Temari will be seen as a full member of the Konoha society, allowed to do whatever she wishes, he stated coldly. What makes you think that she won't go back to Suna? Asked Fugaku. She was nearly killed in the act along with me, the last thing she'll want to do is return to the place that wanted her dead. I want your word, said Naruto with a scowl, offering his hand. Fugaku smirked as he took the hand and shook lightly. Releasing his grip, Naruto took the paper and knelt down on the floor, writing his name in the designated area. Standing up, he handed the parchment to the Hokage. One question, why do you want me dead so badly? You've already had your request, you're not entitled to another one, said Fugaku as the genjutsu was released on Temari. The blonde girl blinked momentarily, trying to figure out what happened as the Naruto she was helping vanished in an instant. She looked around wildly for a moment before her eyes came to look at the real Naruto, who seemed to be having a staring contest with Fugaku. And that's about it, concluded Itachi, finishing explaining what had occurred earlier. Tamari was in hysterics, however, unable to keep her emotions in check. For the second time in just as many days, Naruto had saved her life. Everyone has to know, she said, standing up, brushing the tears out of her eyes. You can't do that, said Itachi firmly. Why not? She asked in response. Because then everything he has done will go to waste. He opted to sacrifice his own life in exchange for allowing you to have a normal life here in Konoha, he explained. If you go around proclaiming what he has signed as false, then it will be for naught. What should I do then? Asked Tamari as tears started to swell in her eyes again. Do the one thing that Naruto wanted you to. What's that? Itachi turned his head slightly, to look her directly in the eye. Live. Tenten snuck around in the middle of the night, keeping to the shadows to the best of her ability. She knew that she wasn't all that stealthy, but what could she do? She knew Anbu had been watching her, but so long as she didn't do anything to gain the attention of anybody else, she would be alright. She had been by the hospital to see whether or not Naruto was still unconscious, but the attendant had told her that he had been dismissed earlier that day. That left the conclusion that Naruto was at the Yondaime's mansion, and now she was on her way to pay a visit. She had no real idea on what she was going to do in order to get in, but she figured she would just work it out when she got there. Tenten knew it wasn't much of a plan, if a plan at all, but knew it was better than nothing. She turned the final corner to the mansion and had to stop in her tracks, seeing the Anbu wearing the lightning mask standing at the gate. She backed away slowly, so that she was peering around the corner by the barest of margins. Tenten watched as he placed his hand on the center of the gate, and a moment passed before there was a defining click and it swung open. Before she could comprehend what was going on, the Anbu had stepped through the gate and closed it behind him, the seal activating and preventing anyone else from going in. Tenten shuddered slowly and turned around, to find herself face to face with Ino. She muffled a scream, covering it with her hands as Ino pressed a finger against her lips, trying to signal to the girl to be silent. What are you doing here? She asked. I was going to see Naruto. The attendant at the hospital said he'd been dismissed, explained Ino, clearly saying that she had had the same idea as the young weapons mistress. What about you? Same thing, answered Tenten. Well, what are we waiting for? Asked Ino. You know that Anbu who was with us the other day, said Tenten, causing Ino to nod. He just stepped inside the gate. Ino opened her mouth to say something but wasn't able to form words as this had been totally unexpected. If he's able to get through, that means he had to have known Naruto's mom or dad, analyzed the blonde. So I think maybe we should come back sometime tomorrow, said Tenten nervously. Yeah, that's a good idea, said Ino nervously, turning around back the way she had come. Tenten walked by her side, neither girl no longer sticking to the shadows. Enko opened the door to her apartment. Somehow it had been fixed from the morning's explosion, to find Tamari cooking away at the stove. After having teased Hana for several hours, she had done some thorough training in the Forest of Death before taking a light nap by the river bed near the memorial stone, despite major investigations being undertaken by the Konoha police force before making her way home. Her nap had gone a lot longer than she had anticipated, and by the time she woke up it had been a couple of hours since the night began. What's cooking? Smells good, said Enko cheerfully as she closed the door behind her. Just making some dinner, said Tamari with a slight sniff, causing Enko's eyes to twitch slightly. What's wrong? Asked the older woman, strolling to Tamari's side. Nothing, she answered, not willing to look up from her work. Come on, you can tell me, said Enko, lightly pushing Tamari's face to the side so that she could look her in the eyes. To see her eyes red raw from the amount she had been crying earlier was not what she expected. I told you it's nothing, said Tamari politely, smiling weakly. Enko wanted to push further for questions but figured that the young girl was simply getting over what had happened the prior day. She may have been putting on a brave face while others were around, but when she was by herself there was nothing stopping her from letting her emotions run free. All right then, if you say so, said Enko, allowing Tamari to get back to her work. Just so you know, if you ever need anybody to talk to, I'm here for you. I'll remember that, said Tamari, hiding a genuine smile as she pushed the pieces of meat around the pan. Murder, there's been a murder, shouted the man at the top of his lungs. What are you talking about? Shouted another man as he rushed to the scene. The first man did nothing but point at the nearby river. The second man, along with another group, who had come to the scene, went in the man's direction and were shocked to find a corpse slowly bobbing up and down in the river. Naruto sat on the inside of the cell, having been brought a tray of food earlier. Unlike the others, the guards had deemed it safer for him if he wasn't permitted to eat with the others. Added to that was that no prisoner was allowed to go anywhere near his cell. He sighed as he grabbed his roll only to hear a light clatter shortly afterwards. Looking at the tray, Naruto found a small silver key which must have been stuck to the bottom of the roll. Placing his roll down, he looked at the key with the knowledge that someone here wanted him out. However, he also knew if he escaped then the blame would fall on Temari's shoulders and she would likely face the executioner's block. With that in mind, he tossed the key out of the cell, the little metal object bouncing across the ground well out of reach. "Excuse me, guard," said Naruto speaking to the shinobi walking into the cell to collect Naruto's empty dish. "What do you want?" he asked impatiently. "I want to write an apology note. I just need to get some things off my mind before morning," said Naruto. "Fine brat," said the guard picking up what he came for. "I'll get you some parchment and something to write with. Be thankful I'm feeling happy tonight." "Cheers," said Naruto as the guard walked out, closing the gate behind him. A thoughtful look overcame Naruto's features as he hoped that they had awoken by now. If by some chance they were able to meet sometime before he would be executed, then he had nothing to worry about. Unfortunately, it was a long chance if any. He could only pray that his plan went successfully. Fugaku was a patient man if there ever was one. However, when a body is found in the clan compound, he may seem composed on the outside, but internally he is fuming. "Who is it?" he demands as he walks up to where the investigation is being held. "Sir, it's Shisui," said one of the Uchiha who had examined the body. "What happened?" "Shisui wasn't the kind of person to just up and drown," said Fugaku angrily. Shisui had been a prominent force of the Konoha police squad with the strength of a Jonin shinobi. There was a suicide note pinned to his chest, however his corpse indicates he's been dead for at least 24 hours, perhaps even more, he explained. "I see, that would explain why he wasn't there to help us last night. Continue the investigation, any clues will be beneficial, come to me if you discover anything of importance," said Fugaku, calming himself if only slightly. He turned around and left the members of the clan to continue their work. He made a beeline towards his house. He wanted to see one individual's reaction more than anything. The door slid open as Fugaku walked inside. "Where's Itachi?" he demanded of his wife and youngest son as he saw them in the kitchen. "Big brother said he was going to be out all night," said Sasuke with a smile spread across his face. Clearly he hadn't heard the news of what had happened within the walls of the compound. "I believe he's on a patrol tonight," said Makoto coldly, not turning to face her husband. Fugaku immediately noticed the way Makoto was acting towards him and a scowl crept across his features. "Sasuke, could you go to your room for a moment? Your mother and I have something to discuss." It wasn't a request, it was an order. The smile dropped off of Sasuke's face as he nodded in response, turning around and leaving the room. He was tempted to eavesdrop on the conversation, but the punishment for getting caught far outweighed the possible gain he might receive. "What's the matter?" he asked, sounding sincere, but Makoto had known him long enough to realize the tone of voice and the lack of true compassion there was behind it. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, placing her knife down on the kitchen cabinet. "What do you mean?" asked Fugaku, trying to avoid the question. "I am asking you, why are you trying to kill my godson?" exclaimed Makoto in a controlled voice. "You will not talk of that trash as if he is related," said Fugaku as his anger began to boil. "He is not trash, he's a human boy and the son of my best friend," said Makoto, fighting back tears. "It doesn't matter that he's a Jinchuriki, he's just a boy and he doesn't deserve to be killed. He gave me his permission today to execute him," said Fugaku coldly. "What was the alternative?" Fugaku was silent as Makoto continued, understanding what the silence meant. "I see, you gave him a choice and his own death was the lesser of two evils. He's like his father, his own well-being is not as important as those around him. I heard the story about how he protected the Hyuga girl when he had only met her hours earlier. Sometimes I wish you had that kind of compassion. I thought you had no complaints about me taking the spot of Hokage, said Fugaku. I didn't voice them, everybody who participated in the event did so out of fear of what you'd do to them if they refused. The Sandame's death prevented our clan from killing one another. If that is how you see it, rather I see it as the Uchiha taking their rightful place as the leaders of Konoha, said Fugaku. Then all Naruto is your crowning glory, you're disgusting you know that, said Makoto turning around and walking out of the kitchen, leaving Fugaku alone. In a fit of rage he slammed his fist down onto the table, snapping the wooden furniture clean in two. Itachi looked over his shoulder, careful as to make sure he wasn't being watched. He knew that they would have discovered Shisui's body by now, but it was thanks to his death that Itachi had prevented something catastrophic. As he slew Shisui, while doing his best to show as little emotion as possible, he had achieved what was once thought lost. The Sharingan above all Sharingan, the Mangekyo Sharingan, and within a handful of hours after obtaining it he had used it in tremendous fashion. Are you there? Asked Itachi as he crept down into a cave. Inside there was a small fire roaring, the smoke exiting through the hole which Itachi had just climbed down. He saw the person sitting by the fire, a couple of fish impaled by kunai sitting by him. Wounds littered his body, bloodied cuts and bruises covered nearly every inch of exposed flesh, yet it was his undetermined will to live on which kept him pushing on. His body may have been weak, but his spirit was strong. I see you have returned Itachi, I was wondering when you were going to come back, said Sarutobi as he placed his pipe to his lips. Well, I had a little trouble. My father has wasted no time in making sure the boundaries of the city are well guarded, said Itachi in his emotionless voice. I must wonder what we have next in store though, since my father wishes to execute Naruto at the pinnacle moment of his coronation. At the mention of Naruto's death, the pipe fell from Sarutobi's lips and clattered on the ground below. That murdering, yelled an enraged Sarutobi but was unable to continue as he began coughing up blood. You can do nothing yet. Also, if you were to wage war with my father in the middle of the city, there is no telling how many lives may be lost, said Itachi somewhat depressed. The third looked to argue but could say nothing in response. If there was to be an exchange, what side would you be on? He asked with the wisdom of a man his age. My connections to the clan died when I killed Shisui, said Itachi calmly. They were placed further away when I placed all of my clan who attacked you under a genjutsu to help you escape. You have no regrets? Asked Sarutobi. This time it was Itachi who couldn't say anything. Knowing he had touched a sore spot, Sarutobi decided on a change of topic. I doubt the Hyuga will stay quiet tomorrow. They might have to, said Itachi, causing the Sandame to lift his head. My father got Naruto to sign a waiver saying that he had helped in your death and as such committed treason. He did this so that the girl from the sand didn't get executed in his place. That means that even if he were to escape, he would be considered an S-rank threat and be hunted for the rest of his life, said Sarutobi. Only myself showing up would rectify what had happened, but in doing so the battle which may occur would only cause more bloodshed. Then what do you suggest we do? Asked Itachi. Before Sarutobi could so much as mutter an answer, there was the sound of someone landing within the cave, causing Itachi to turn around in an instant and toss a kunai at the intruder at breakneck speed. He was stunned, however, to find that the person had managed to catch the kunai between two fingers without the blade so much as scraping him. Itachi felt a slight piece of fear as he recognized the person as the masked Anbu, as the one who had fought against his father earlier that day and despite having released several shadow clones was able to effectively fight against him. You want to know what you should do? Then listen to me, he said, removing his mask much to reveal the face of the fourth, much to the shock of Itachi and Sarutobi. Minato, said the third in little more than a whisper, his voice having lost most of its strength when he saw his successor. Minato could only smile in response before he continued. Quick mother, if we wait any longer we're going to miss father becoming the Hokage, said Sasuke with a smile. Itachi hadn't come back that night, but he didn't really care all too much since it was a special day for the Uchiha. No doubt his brother was already at the ceremony making sure everything went smoothly. I'm not going, stated Makoto coldly. Why not, Mum? Is it because of last night? Asked Sasuke innocently. That's part of it, she answered. Then what else? Asked the young boy. It's nothing to concern yourself about, Sasuke. I'm going to tend to the garden for a while since nobody's around. I would like a hand if you don't mind. Makoto's head turned to face Sasuke, a small smile on her face as he nodded, willing to help his mother in the garden. Little did he know that the smile was a forced one. The people were crowded in the middle of the street. It had been less than 2 days since the incident had occurred and already Fugaku had been proclaimed as the next Hokage. He gave the speech everybody expected him to about how he was going to protect the village and the like, however it was what came afterwards which caused the murmurs to silence. I have heard the people talking in the streets, shouted Fugaku as he descended down the staircase. I know what it is that you fear every day. However, due to the third's law, I will respect his wishes by not revealing the secret to everyone here in honor of his memory. What I have here is a signed confession from one Uzumaki Naruto, claiming how he helped in the assassination of the Sandaime. The reaction was instantaneous as civilians began yelling at the top of their lungs, backed by the Uchiha, all demanding Naruto's head. The ninja of the village couldn't believe what they were hearing. Even the precious Ika Ika book that Kakashi carries around dropped limply from his hand. A few of the braver shinobi, including one very aggressive Anko, shouted their opinions but were drowned out by the shouts for murder. Hiashi felt a tug on his robes and found Hinata pulling at them. Please tell me it's not true, father, she said with tears swelling up in her eyes. He wanted to say that everything would be alright, but with the civilians as riled up as they were, if Naruto wasn't punished, even if it wasn't true, no doubt there would be a riot. While they may not have any combat skills, they had far greater numbers and Konoha would undoubtedly reach civil turmoil. As Fugaku made his way through the crowd, Anbu ensuring that they parted at his command, he entered the middle of the rabble and a circle was formed. I have heard your calls, and I will answer your prayers, for Uzumaki Naruto is within captivity. I am a man of justice, however, and I will leave it to the citizens of Konoha to decide whether or not he lives. Those who wish for him to live, let me hear your voice. A minute roar of approval erupted from the ninjas of Konoha, including a very undignified, "Let him live, you bastard." From the snake mistress. Tamari screamed at the top of her lungs, as did Ino, Tenten and Hana. Many of the students from Naruto's class yelled out, but it was little more than a nuisance. Hinata was too scared to shout out. She could already tell how this was going to end. She simply thanked the elders for looking after Hanabi so that she didn't have to see this. Sakura was about to throw her voice into the mix, but her mother slammed her palm onto her daughter's shoulder, giving her a look that said that if Sakura wanted to eat dinner tonight she would stay quiet. That didn't stop her from yelling out. Kakashi had a scowl imprinted behind his mask. Fugaku had bent the rules in his favor. He had gotten the crowd on his side, and even if they had chosen to let Naruto live, he would simply be locked up away in the dungeon for the rest of his life, if one could call that a life. With that in mind, he turned and made his way through the crowd. He would not bear witness to his sensei's legacy's death. He knew that it was possible for him to do something, but with everything as it was currently, the consequences on Konoha as a whole would be catastrophic. In order to rescue Naruto, he would need to do so while the boy was in the presence of the Hokage, and in doing so he would be labeled a traitor. Then he would need a miracle to get out of the village alive. Successfully getting out with Naruto intact would have unbelievable odds. For the first time since losing Rin and Obito, Kakashi, the master of 1,000 jutsus, cried. Silence, said Fugaku, getting everything under control. Now let us hear who wishes to have the boy executed. The roar was deafening. Are you okay with this? I need to make sure it goes through, otherwise we may be hunted down. With the crowd riled up as they were, Naruto was presented in shackles, slowly making his way past everybody. They parted to let him pass before they grabbed anything they could get their hands on and threw it at him. He made no motions, no complaints as food, rocks, even people's shoes, hit him all over. He made his way, accompanied by 2 Anbu, but was stopped as Anko shoved her way onto the path. Gaki, tell me it's not true, she shouted as she grabbed his shoulders. He looked her in the eyes, the teary glazed balls of hers staring directly into his, but he made no sound. Tell me, she shouted before the Anbu had to step in and restrain her. That was all the time needed for another member of the crowd to strike. Naruto felt a tap on the shoulder and turned to find himself looking at somebody hiding under a green cloak, identical in height to him, golden locks of hair the only thing people could see from a higher perspective due to the hood covering their face. For Naruto, however, he was able to see everything, and silently nod in acknowledgement before pulling a piece of paper out of his pocket. The stranger quickly took the paper, trying their hardest not to be seen before melding back into the crowd. Without his Anbu guards, Naruto continued his way down the path until he stood opposite Fugaku. Are you ready to suffer for what you have done? The Hokage asked with an overbearing presence. Are you willing to die due to the pain you inflicted on this city? You're really making a show of this, aren't you? Said Naruto with a cheeky smirk which angered Fugaku. The smirk dropped before it was replaced by a look of pure seriousness. I'm ready, how do you want to do this? Now it was Fugaku's time to smirk as an Uchiha walked up to him, bearing a traditional Japanese katana. You will be beheaded, it is your choice whether or not you wish to be standing or kneeling when it happens. It doesn't matter, it's not like I'm going to beg for mercy or anything, said Naruto. I must ask though, you still intend to keep your word? For those who heard the small conversation, they were slightly confused at this part. The papers have already been filled out, said Fugaku, placing the blade of the katana on Naruto's shoulders, the sharp metal drawing blood from Naruto's neck at the pressure. Farewell, Uzumaki Naruto, demon of Konoha. Naruto simply closed his eyes as Fugaku lifted the katana over his shoulder before striking at the boy, the head falling to the ground before the body. The crying of several young women couldn't be heard over the roar of appraisal. Are you alright? Asked the cloaked man as they walked out the city gates, the two guards currently off duty due to the coronation. It's not every day you see a public execution. I'm fine, said the second figure as the first picked them up bridal style and leapt away at an incredible speed. When they were roughly 2 miles out of the city's walls, the man stopped and placed the second person on the ground. He took the hood of his cloak, revealing the face of Minato Namikaze, his features clearly distinguished in the sunlight. I was just asking, since while it's not often you see an execution, it's even rarer to see your own death, said Minato. The second figure removed their hood to reveal strips of golden hair matching that of Minato's. The facial features were well defined despite the fact it looked like they were pouting. I told you I'm fine, said Naruto in a high-pitched voice. Just because I'm a woman for the moment doesn't mean I'm oversympathetic. Alright, I'm still a little shocked to find that my only son had become a girl, said Minato, rubbing the back of his head. Shut up, Dad, let's not talk about it, said Naruto as the two diverged into the forest nearby. After walking for another mile, they stopped by a tree before two figures leapt down from the nearby branches to land before them. Hey Gramps, how you going? She asked with a smile imprinted on her face. That's all the proof I need that this girl is Naruto, said Sarutobi with a smile. He was the only one who didn't call me by either my name or title. I am interested to hear how this came about, said Itachi, looking somewhat perplexed. Now that you have switched genders, what name do you wish to go by? Naruko, she said smiling. We've got a long journey and young Naruko here can explain everything along the way, but I would appreciate it if we hurry, said Minato. What's the rush? Asked Naruko. You haven't yet told us where we're going, said Sarutobi. Uzushiogakure, Kushina's home, said Minato. We're going to see Mum's hometown, exclaimed Naruko happily. The village hidden among the whirling tides, why there of all places? Asked Itachi. Because it is there where I will finish my mission, said Minato, gaining their attention. He looked up, looking at the group intently. It is there where the fourth will be rise again. Sakura sat on top of her bed, her eyes red from the amount of tears she had cried. She knew at the same time that her friends would be going through a similar experience, but she felt little comfort in that. They had lost Naruto for 6 months only to lose him again, and this time they knew he wasn't coming back. She sniffed loudly, forgetting all about the proper manners her mother had taught her simply to let raw emotion leak out. After seeing Naruto behave with the Sandaime on several occasions, she didn't believe for a second that he would betray him. Since most of the village didn't know him all that well, opting to stay away from him. Fugaku had used that knowledge in order to get the people's vote on the matter. As far as she knew, however, this was all speculation, and against the Hokage nobody would support her. It was as if then that a resolve hit her like a ton of bricks as she stood up, wiping the tears from her eyes. Opening the window, her mind worked at a rapid pace as she plotted like the young girl she was. By the time her mother went to check on her, she found the wardrobe empty and no sign of her daughter. Itachi, Sarutobi and Minato leapt through the trees, Naruto clinging to her father's back. What do you mean by the fourth will rise again? Asked Itachi, confused by the former leader's words. Like the Naruto that was executed today, I am a blood clone, explained Minato, not looking at the others. Another technique you developed? Asked Sarutobi, already knowing the answer. Indeed, this one creates an exact copy of yourself, down to the amount of chakra in your system, explained Minato. The only difference between the original and the clone is the chakra regeneration, which is at a much slower rate. However, to perform the jutsu it takes every inch of your chakra to execute, and unless you have medical staff at the ready there is a chance you will die. Only reason I survived was because Tsunade was there to look after me when I tried it out. Afterwards she told me if I ever tried to do something like that again she would skin me and show me exactly which points of the human body hurt the most when jabbed with a searing fire poker. Sarutobi chuckled, the statement sounding exactly like what his former student would have done. Gathering his bearings, he asked another question. Why were you so intent on making this type of clone? I've already figured that you have all the memories of your original self, so don't try and say that you don't know. Clever as always, since in all actuality the blood clone is an exact replica of the person down to the smallest detail. I served the Yondaime by doing all the paperwork and working in the Hokage's office while he kept on top of more personal matters. You still haven't answered my question, said Itachi monochromatically. The Yondaime risked his life protecting the village from the Kyuubi, but when he sealed it in Naruto he also sealed a piece of his soul as a safe keep. I managed to get his body somewhere safe and with Tsunade's help get it into a stable condition. However, when he offered his soul to Shinigami his body went into a vegetative state. The only way he'll wake up is if the soul that he placed in Naruto is returned, explained the clone. Are you alright, Naruto? Asked Sarutobi looking at the child on Minato's back. What do you mean? She asked. About finding out that the Kyuubi is sealed inside of you. You didn't tell him? Asked Minato looking across at his predecessor. I spent 6 months in your mansion, I found out myself, said Naruto, shocking Sarutobi slightly, and while I was irked I knew that it was what was needed to be done. I am angry at you, Dad, and when I change back to a guy the first can tell you he isn't going to be happy. I've been meaning to ask, how did you become a female? Asked Itachi. The procession came to a halt at this, all parties wanting to hear the explanation. Naruto sighed as she looked at the branch her father was standing on. Naruto and I, she started slowly. We're two people who share the same body. I've only come out a couple of times prior to this, usually when the mind is too weak to continue. The most recent time before this was when Naruto killed that Kumo nin. His mind wasn't prepared to face the fact he had killed someone and it shut down in order to stop him from hurting himself. This time was probably because Naruto couldn't withstand the stress the blood clone jutsu had put on his body and his mind shut down. Yet the body was still strong, and I think the Kyuubi wouldn't let the body grow weak while the mind wasn't operating. So you're saying the Kyuubi created you to keep its host alive, said Sarutobi. The seal I placed on Naruto means that if he were to die, the Kyuubi would die as well, explained the Minato clone. It makes sense that it would wish to stay alive as much as possible by keeping the host alive, one way or another. I don't doubt for a second that the Kyuubi doesn't have the power to create a second personality or change a person's gender to suit said personality. I'm not sure whether or not my reasoning is right, but we can't know for sure, said Naruto as they started to move once again. I can only guess as to the actual reason. Well, let's not worry about it, moving as fast as we can with Sarutobi in his current condition. We should get to Uzushiogakure by week's end provided we rest at night, explained the clone looking forward once again. How are you going to explain to yourself everything that has happened? I doubt it works like the shadow clone technique where the memories and experiences are transferred over, analyzed the third. I am going to transfer everything through a mind link when his soul is reattached, said the clone. In doing so, my existence will be erased as I give all of my energy, chakra, and spirit back to the original host. Without his soul, he will not generate chakra or anything of the like, so I need to give him everything I have. After my battle with the Uchiha on the rooftops, however, my power is not that great, and since a blood clone's recovery period is far longer than a normal person's, it may be some time before Minato is back to his full strength. Then let's not waste a minute, said Itachi as he pressed forward, his pace quickening ever so slightly. Sarutobi sighed as he looked over at Minato as they leapt through the air. Kids these days, he said with a chuckle before his speed kicked up to another notch, the professor gliding through the trees at a pace many would think impossible for a man his age. Hold on tight, warned Minato, and Naruto was just able to tighten her grip before the clone proved why even in a weakened state he could keep up a speed many would simply think unbelievable. What are we doing here? Asked Hinata, sobbing softly like many of the other girls around her. Sakura had gathered every young woman who held some sort of emotional connection with Naruto. Most of the ones she had found were still mourning in their own way. As an example, she had found Anko decimating practice dummies with explosives, leaving nothing but torn pieces of straw in its wake. Why I brought you all here is because we all cared about Naruto, explained Sakura. Then why bring us to his front gate instead of meeting up at one of our houses, said Ino, clearly frustrated. The other girls had to agree that it was disturbing that the place they had been brought was the Yondaimi's mansion of all places. The Hokage has taken Naruto away from us for no reason whatsoever, proclaimed Sakura, but before she could continue, Temari spoke up. Actually, when I got taken to the dungeons yesterday, Naruto got taken down there as well, she said, her voice barely audible. What happened? Asked Tenten, worry fraught within her voice. I don't know, everything went blurry and then Naruto was injured and coughing up blood, then he was back to normal as if nothing happened. Apparently I was under the effects of a genjutsu, but this one Uchiha told me what happened. Naruto signed a form. Temari had to pause momentarily to wipe the tears from her eyes and catch her breath. What was on the form? Asked Hana, the dogs at her feet whimpering slightly. It said that he was the one responsible for the assassination of the Hokage, she said as she fell to her knees, tears freely flowing from her eyes. The others took a step back in shock, but they knew that Naruto saw the Sandaime as a grandfather and treated him with respect. The very thought of him plotting to kill as a person he saw as family was blasphemous. They hadn't believed it when Fugaku had announced it, but to hear that he had actually signed a death waiver meant he knew he would be executed. What would have happened if he didn't sign it? Asked Tenten, recovering first. That I would be executed instead, said Temari with a sob. I don't know why he'd do something like that for me. A solid crack was heard as Anko's fist hit the side of a tree, breaking the bark covering the trunk. That's self-righteous as whole, she said, fighting back tears. He fucking does everything he can to help everyone but himself. A true leader of the pack, said Hana as she sat down on the ground, rubbing the head of one of the Heimaru brothers. Naruto-kun, said Hinata softly as she embraced Tenten for comfort, both girls openly letting their tears run down their cheeks. Why do you have to be so good? Screamed Ino as she dropped to her knees, clutching the sides of her head, unable to come up with any better words. Sakura found her resolve first and pumped a fist. Fugaku took what's precious from us when all Naruto was doing was protecting us, she said with anger in her voice. Yet in years to come he'll still expect us to serve under his reign, and I say that's bullshit. Ino gasped lightly. That was the first time she had ever heard her lifelong friend curse. It was also the first time she had ever heard her sound so inspiring. Death can do mysterious things to one's personality. What do you want us to do? Asked Tenten. Sakura smirked as she brushed the tears from her eyes and walked up to the gate. Before anybody could ask what she was doing, she put her hand on the insignia and allowed her chakra to pump through it, causing an audible click to be heard before the gate swung open wide. How the hell can you get into the Yondaimi's mansion? Exclaimed Anko, being blunt on the topic. When Hinata and I went to teach Naruto proper manners, he taught me how to get in. Now hurry on in before we're spotted, she urged, ushering everybody in before closing the gate, ensuring they were locked in. So you wanted to bring us here, why now? Asked Hana, the Heimaru pups sniffing around the compound, never having treaded on the ground before. We're going to become the best kunoichis the shinobi world has ever seen, she proclaimed boldly, much like how Naruto would have done. She then pointed a finger at Anko and Hana. You two are going to be the ones to teach us. You want us to teach you? Questioned Anko in minor shock. What makes you think you can teach us? We're at the Yondaime's mansion, he would have a copy of hundreds of jutsu written down here, said Sakura. We have all the resources here and nobody has been able to get into the mansion for years, we're not going to be disturbed. We can spend as much time as we want here and learn more than the academy could ever teach us. I'm not so sure, said Ino. What about food? Sakura opened her mouth to answer but no words came out. Instead it was Tenten who answered in her stead. Naruto stayed in here for 6 months, he had to live off of something, she answered. There's probably enough food in here to last a year-long siege, maybe even more. Come on guys, we've got an opportunity that others would kill for sitting in front of us, please everyone, begged Sakura. I was told by the Uchiha who told me everything that Naruto had wanted me to live, said Temari standing upright, holding her chin high. What better way to honor his memory than to do what he would have done, get stronger and show the ninja world who's boss. Hana couldn't help but smile at the other girl's speech. She was an 11-year-old girl who had had everything taken away from her, now with nothing to lose she wanted to take life by the horns. Naruto lost his life defending his pack, she said proudly, it would be a shame if the pack split up as a result of it. I'm in. What about our parents? Asked Hinata. Being a future clan head she knew what this could mean. Before I got you guys I went to the library and wrote letters to all of your parents explaining where we were and where we would be going, said Sakura. I delivered them to the post office so your parents should get them by morning. They may come banging on the door but no matter what happens they can't get in. Aren't you organized? Said Anko with a cunning smirk. I like your style kid, and although I'm risking my chunin status I'd rather be a missing nin than serve under that bastard Uchiha. Daddy might not like it but with me out of the house he might have time to go find a girlfriend, said Tenten weighing the benefits against the negatives. If he knows that I'm going to be safe I think he'll be okay, let's do this. I don't give a shit about my mother at the moment so I don't care if she brings the Anbu to tear down the walls, I'm not going home, said Sakura putting her hand into the middle of the circle they had made. Anko, Hana, Temari and Tenten all put their hands on top of one another, having all agreed to stay. I know daddy may be angry but. Hinata paused as her mind flicked back to the fact that Hiyashi had written a marriage contract between her and Naruto which only her and her uncle had been told about. I'll do it, she concluded with a shout of confidence, slapping her hand on top of Tenten's. I'm not sure guys, said Ino nervously. Please Ino, said Sakura holding out her spare hand comfortingly to her best friend. Ino looked at the pink-haired girl, then at the rest of them looking at her expectantly with smiles on their faces. With a sigh, she admitted defeat. Well if Hinata's doing it I'd look pretty ridiculous if I didn't do it, she said with a laugh as she chucked her hand on top of Hinata's. That's the spirit, said Sakura with a smile before the group was distracted by the sound of the Heimaru brothers barking urgently. Wonder what they found, said Hana as she broke away from the circle to where the dogs were, followed closely by the others. The dogs led them to the training ground where the straw dummies, the wall and even the grass was bathed in blood, creating a sickening sight. Nobody backs out now, said Anko as several of the girls gagged at the sight of the blood. Where is Itachi? Bellowed Fugaku angrily. We don't know sir, replied one of the Anbu. He was meant to have a shift last night but never appeared. Find him now, he's got some explaining to do, shouted Fugaku as the Anbu vanished in an instant in search of Fugaku's son. A week had passed with little difficulty, and the 3 shinobi had made it to Uzushiogakure with little hassle. Naruko looked in awe from her father's back, having finally reached somewhere out of the forest. She was disappointed however when they walked out onto the streets to find that there wasn't anybody around. Where is everyone? She asked innocently. People were scared of what the people of this village could do, so they were attacked, explained the clone taking Naruko off his back. Those who survived fled around the world, nobody ever comes by here anymore, hence why it is a perfect place to hide someone who was meant to be dead. Clever as always, said Sarutobi pulling out his pipe. Hiding a dead man in a dead town. As far as I know, there's only been 2 other occupants living here to look after Minato, said the clone. That was my first mission, hunt down somebody to take care of the Yondaime. Who was it? Asked Itachi but was stopped as somebody walked onto the street with shoulder-length blonde hair wearing a green robe. Tsunade! Exclaimed Sarutobi looking at his former pupil. Sarutobi-sensei, it's good to see you, said Tsunade walking up to her sensei, embracing the elderly man in a hug causing him to wince lightly in pain. What's wrong? There was a coup by my clan, explained Itachi. Sarutobi got wounded in the fight before I could get him out of there in one piece. And none of you have squad in medical jutsu, this is why I wanted to have a 4th member on every genin squad, one who had some basics in medical jutsu, sighed Tsunade. Your counterpart and I are having a talk when he awakes, said Tsunade angrily pointing a fist at the clone. The sooner the better, said the clone. Are you Tsunade of the Sannin? Asked Naruto in awe. I read about you in my dad's library. Tsunade blinked momentarily, looking at the Minato clone, then to Naruto and back again. I thought you had a son, she said. We hope to find a solution to that by day's end, said the clone. Now let's awaken the 4th. Indeed, said Tsunade turning and leading them down the street. Didn't it get lonely here? Asked Naruto. Well, I had a job to do, and if I wasn't here I might have been wasting all of money at a casino or something along those lines, said Tsunade with a light laugh. Anyway, I wasn't alone. You weren't. Not at all, said Tsunade opening the door to the hospital. After taking several turns they reached the required room. Did you deal with the invaders, Tsunade-sama? Asked a young voice from behind the door. It's fine, Shizune, you can open up, we have guests, said the Sannin. The door opened slowly and the first thing that happened was a small piglet run out of the door, squeaking at Tsunade's feet. Come here, Tenten, said the young woman as she ran after the piglet. She scooped the young pig up in her arms and nestled it against her chest. Only then did she realize who she was looking at. Part of her was shocked looking at the Sandaime while another part of her was relieved that the Yondaime clone had returned at long last. Then there were the other 2, an Uchiha and a young girl roughly 6 years younger than herself smiling at her. She then looked at the girl, to Minato's clone, then back to the girl before finally landing on Tsunade. I thought the Yondaime had a son. Don't worry about it, said Tsunade brushing it off. She then grabbed both Naruto and the clone by the ear, dragging them painfully into the room. Shizune, fix the wounds on the old man's body to the best of your ability, I'll judge you later. Yes, Tsunade-sama, said Shizune proudly as the door to the room closed, blocking off the rest from those inside. So what do we have to do? Asked Naruto as they were pulled next to the unconscious form of the Yondaime. A monitor nearby measured his heartbeat as being barely alive, the line only going up minimally at a slow rate. Don't worry, brat, you've got the smallest part to play, said Tsunade. Just keep quiet and let the professionals do their thing. Half an hour later, the room opened wide as Tsunade and Naruto walked out. Itachi, Shizune and Sarutobi were all waiting patiently in the hallway as footsteps were heard from inside the room. Small steps were taken as the man left the room to stand in the doorway. Before the first time in over 8 years, the Yondaime opened his eyes. Hana tended to the vegetable garden as the Heimaru brothers played with one another behind her on the grass. While the freezer was filled to the brim, they had figured that the food would only last so long. There had been a shed out the back filled with gardening tools, and amongst the dust they had found packets of seeds which they had instantly put to use. With the Heimaru brothers' help they were able to find some good soil and start their own little garden. Again, it would only last so long, but it was still a temporary solution. They had managed to avoid detection thus far because of a genjutsu Anko had found in the library on their first day, which gave the illusion that nobody was on the premises. It wouldn't work on a genjutsu specialist or if one of the Uchihas activated their Sharingan, but they would weather the storm out until such a time. It had helped because not 3 days after that some people had come snooping by looking for a way to get in now that Naruto was gone. Hana's hand shovel dropped from her palm and hit the soil softly as she brought her knees up to her chest and tears threatened to swell up in her eyes. Nobody had truly gotten over Naruto's death, On more than one occasion in the middle of the night she had been awoken by the sound of somebody crying. Yet apart from Anko she was the eldest, some of the girls had even called her the more mature one, making Anko pout slightly, and in times like these she had to put on the brave face and swallow up her emotions. She had to be strong in front of the pack. A light explosion brought her back to reality as she wiped the tears from her eyes. From the sound of it, Anko was teaching them the fundamentals of explosion tags. It was then that she realized she didn't actually have anything to teach them, as all of the techniques she knew focused on teamwork with her canine counterparts. Leaving the garden as it was, she got to her feet to go investigate the library. She knew she could teach them things like how to properly throw a shuriken or kunai, but that thing was trivial and it could only be done for so long. Taijutsu wasn't her forte, and knowing Anko she would want the girls to develop something that was comfortable for them rather than teach them something which may only hinder them down the track. Hinata had basic training in her family style, but that was only the fundamentals. Once they had gotten onto that part they would look into the archive and figure something out. They had briefly looked over the library when, having their first glance on the inside of the house, they had discovered there were over 10 bedrooms. They figured it was in case the hosts held a party and the people opted to simply crash rather than go home, and found that the scrolls had been split up into different categories. There was the simple breakdown of ninjutsu, genjutsu, taijutsu, kenjutsu, fuinjutsu, and even senjutsu. Then after that it was broken down further into subcategories such as the elements for ninjutsu, or the plethora of techniques taijutsu offered. Pulling a scroll off the shelf, she looked at it carefully, noticing that it was an earth technique, which from her memory was her affiliated element. Opening it up, she quickly took notice of the bee in the corner before looking at it in its entirety. Doden. Doryuheiki, she said, reading over the instructions. Summons a wall made out of solid earth. Well, I guess it's a start, she said as she rolled it up and prepared to practice. She then inclined her head to the roof as if looking to the heavens. Naruto, if you're watching from up there, know that we're going to make you proud, she said with a smile. Well, your chakra seems to be replenishing itself, if at a slow rate, which is remarkable in itself since you've been diminished of chakra since the attack, analyzed Tsunade as the light green vapor around her hand vanished. However, since your muscles haven't moved for the later half of 10 years, they've deteriorated majorly. It will take about 3 years of rehabilitation before you return to your former glory. You make it sound like a problem, said Minato as he tossed his shirt back on. It's just a little rehabilitation. What of Konoha? Asked the third as he sat nearby, his pipe firmly placed between his lips. If my father's gone this far to achieve power, he's not going to relinquish it that easily, said Itachi from the sidelines. If anything, he will try to make your death look like a good thing and try to shine a new light on the village, as it were. One way or another he'll show that Konoha is still a force to reckon with, but he's not stupid enough to wage war with everyone, analyzed Minato. So when you're fully recovered, you'll storm back into Konoha and find it's just the way you'll remember it, said Tsunade in a mocking tone. Except the idiot's head will be on the wall, grumbled Naruto. Well, that's something we'll have to fix, said Minato, rubbing his child's head innocently. Now what we've got to figure out is how to get you back to normal. Any ideas, Tsunade? We're talking about something that didn't come naturally. Medical science is only going to do so much in changing a person back to their original gender. From what Naruto has described, it has something to do with Naruto's mind falling into a state of shock, much like how a body would fall into a coma. However, with there being two personalities, one simply shut off, allowing the other to awaken. I have an idea, said Naruto, shocking the others in the room. What is it? Asked Itachi curiously. You're just going to have to trust me on this one, she said solemnly before walking out the room, closing the door behind her. As she walked down the walkway, the door opened and closed behind her and Naruto turned to see Shizune lightly jogging towards her. Please tell me what you're going to do, I'm worried, she said in a serious tone. It would be hard to explain, said Naruto, her voice sounding like that of a typical Nara. Do it, said Shizune threateningly. All right, said Naruto, raising her hands up in defense. In order for my father to gain the memories of his clone, the clone had to transfer every partial of energy he had into my father, effectively becoming one person sharing two bodies, but one was now just a corpse. I'm the opposite, I have two minds sharing one body. So you're going to try and mold your minds together, but then what will happen to you? Asked Shizune. The silence that she received wasn't reassuring in the least. Do you have any idea how you're going to do this? Meditation. There's probably a quicker way, but this is something which allows me to focus on the spirit and mind solely and ignore everything else, said Naruto slowly before turning around. Whether or not we'll see each other again is questionable, because I'll be putting myself in the coma-like state that Naruto is in now in his place and effectively transfer my life energy over to him. Let's hope it all goes well. Before she could walk off, she felt a pair of arms wrap around her waist and envelop her in a hug, Shizune's pressing into Naruto's back. Be careful, she whispered softly into Naruto's ear, making the young girl shiver lightly. As the grip was released, Naruto opted not to turn around and continued walking down the corridor, intent on finding a position where she could meditate in peace. Shizune, however, had crossed her arms across her body, each hand grasping the opposite shoulder. Even if we've only just met, I don't want to lose anybody else, whispered Shizune before putting on a brave face and heading back within the room everybody else was in. Tenten sat on the roof of the mansion, having scaled a water pipe to reach the top. She was currently basking in the rays of the late afternoon sunlight, the golden beams of light gently caressing her skin. She had stripped down to her underwear, enjoying the feeling of the heat on her body, and since the roof had been basking in the sunlight all day, she was able to get the warm feeling all around her body. The day's training had been what she had expected with Anko, the activities mostly involving sharp pointy objects of pieces of paper that went boom. Having lived with her father as a traveling merchant for some time, he had always kept ninja weapons available to sell to shinobi on the road. When they would set up camp for a night, she would often practice throwing kunai and shuriken into nearby trees, much to her father's amusement. From these daily sessions, she had become quite adept at weapon work, but she knew that fighting a battle solely with weapons could only get her so far. To her knowledge, nearly every ninja used some form of technique, even if it was a signature move used only in the most opportune moments. So even if her arsenal consisted mainly of weapons to help batter an enemy down to a reasonable level, she still had to finish them somehow. Anko had explained to her on a one-on-one basis after she showed her weapon expertise that to finish off an enemy with a katana or anything similar that she had to get close. While it had seemed like a good idea, Anko told her how this forced an opponent to fight in a taijutsu battle, and if you weren't quick enough, you wouldn't be able to deal the final blow before allowing the upper hand to slip back into the opponent's hand. She wasn't sure how reliable Anko's information was, considering the Chunin had never taught anyone beside Naruto before, but apart from Hana she wasn't going to get a different opinion. With that thought in mind, Tenten stood up, slipping slightly on the roof tiles before regaining her balance. She needed to hunt down the young Inuzuka to ask her for advice. Putting her clothes back on, she began to descend down the water pipe, making her way silently down without anybody noticing. Weapons are good for silent kills, she muttered to herself, realizing how easy that would have been to slip into somebody's home. Maybe there are some benefits to being good with weapons. Shaking her head of the thoughts, she ran off in search of Hana, hoping to get a second opinion. Nighttime fell upon the land. Shadows merged into one another to form placid darkness illuminated by the light of the moon. It was under this light that Naruto opened his eyes as a flood of memories engulfed him, those of his counterpart he was now aware of. I see, he said softly as he raised his head to the sky. Thank you. Hanabi paced around the corridor awkwardly. Her father had told her about what had happened with Naruto and she had cried about it for hours on end. Hours later, when she had found out that Hinata had gone away for a while, she felt lost and confused. The only person who had really comforted her had been Neji, but even he hadn't been able to answer the questions she had asked. Questions such as, why is Naruto dead? And, when will my sister be back? He had no valid answer to and could only hug her as if she was his own sister. It had been a week since then, and she had noticed that the Hyuga elders had been looking at her a bit differently, along with the fact that they now paid attention to her training sessions much like they would have Hinata's. She didn't know what this meant, but feeling all of the eyes prying onto her back made her nervous for some reason. Her father had told her that it was because she wasn't used to such an audience and would get used to it after a couple of weeks. As she prepared for bed, she said a silent prayer in her head. She wanted things to go back to the way they were in a couple of weeks, where her sister would tuck her into bed and would tell her about the eccentric things Naruto had done in class. A tear slipped down her cheek as she realized that was never going to happen again. You're a pretty good cook, Ino, said Enko in between mouthfuls as she shoveled food down her throat. When the other girls had first seen her eat like this, they had been mildly disgusted. Now they realized it was just the way she did things. Although it was tough to call who was quicker a couple nights earlier when Hana had made a few small steaks from the meat within the freezer and the young Inuzuka had torn into it like her dogs had. I helped my mum a lot when I was younger, said Ino bashfully accepting the comment. What are you drinking, Anko? Asked Hinata pointing to the bottle next to the snake mistress bowl. Sake, said Anko plainly. You want a taste? She offered. What does it taste like? She asked innocently. Doesn't sake make you drunk? Asked Sakura, having mild knowledge of different forms of alcohol. And that's the reason why you girls aren't having anything, you're far too young, said Hana, putting her foot down. They're old enough to become trained killers but not old enough to drink. What kind of screwed up logic is that? Asked Anko as she swayed lightly, drinking half the bottle in a single mouthful. Where did you even get that? Asked Tenten. There's a cellar downstairs with racks full of this and other things like vodka from the land of snow. Never tried none of that stuff before, said Anko, slurring slightly. Don't really care though, sake's good enough for me. Is that supposed to happen? Asked Hinata curiously. Sake is a type of alcohol. Alcohol screws around with a person's head and makes them do stupid things. They even say things they don't mean to at some times. Alcohol has this ability to make people say what they really mean when somebody's drunk enough of it, said Tamari, looking at Hinata before looking back at Anko. What I want to know is how did you only get drunk off of half a bottle? Half a bottle? What type of lightweight do you think I am, miss? I can't throw a shuriken straight, said Anko, referring to earlier training. While Tamari had been able to throw kunai with respectable accuracy, shuriken had proven a little difficult. Anko reached down by the legs of the seat she was sitting on, nearly falling off in the process, before pulling up 5 empty bottles. I've had this many bottles already and that's my 4th I'm drinking at the moment. Does alcohol in the system prevent you from counting properly? Asked Hinata, to which Tamari nodded silently. This is what my dad does every Friday night. Asked Ino in shock. She knew her father went out drinking with his mates but had no idea this was what he turned into. It's disgusting, isn't it? Said Hana, getting up from her seat. Come on, Anko, I'll take you to bed. That's exactly the kind of thing I wanted to hear, shouted Anko as she stood up in a fluid motion, banging the table with her hip in the process. I bet you're an expert on doggy style. Hana shook her head as she grabbed Anko's wrist and started dragging her up the flight of stairs nearby towards Anko's bedroom. The table was quiet for a while as they heard Anko banging against the corridors. It was Hinata who was the first to speak up. What's doggy style? Minato was walking through the streets, a hospital crutch tucked under his left shoulder for support. Naruto hadn't returned yet and he was starting to get a little worried for his son's safety. Everybody else had found accommodation in one of the abandoned houses after clearing it of dust. Tsunade had insisted that Sarutobi stay close to her in case any infection appeared so that she was easy to get to. Itachi had gone to the penthouse of an old hotel, saying that if he was going to be living here for 3 years while the Yondaime returned to his former glory, he was going to do it in style. Minato stopped as he saw a figure walking towards him and was relieved to see that it was his son, back in the form his clone had first seen. Naruto walked slowly, dragging his feet across the dirt. Minato didn't say anything as Naruto stopped just a few feet away from him. Dad, he said with a parched throat softly before stepping forward and burying his fist in his father's stomach, knocking the wind out of him. This was quickly followed up with Naruto wrapping his arms around Minato's waist and bursting into tears. The Yondaime allowed the crutch to fall limply onto the ground as he put his arms around his son, no words needing be said in this timeless moment. So we've got to stay here for 3 years while you recover, said Naruto as he and his father walked side by side, the hospital crutch in Minato's offhand as he leant on his son for support. This is the first time you've ever spoken to me and that's the first thing you say. asked Minato in return. I'll just figure out my standpoint at the moment. Also, if that's right, then we've got 3 years to catch up, said Naruto, flashing his father a smile. It's not all going to be fun and games, said Minato, looking down into the eyes of his son, mimicking the smile on his lips with his own. We're heading into a potential war at the end of it, and we've got to make sure you're ready for it just in case it happens. Tsunade, Sarutobi, Itachi and I are going to be teaching you how to be a ninja. By the time we are ready to leave, you're going to be able to ace the Chunin exams. Really? That's awesome, said Naruto, enthusiastically pumping the fist that wasn't wrapped around his father's waist. Not many people get an opportunity like the one you're getting now, said Minato, ruffling his son's hair. Look forward to it. Before Naruto could answer, his stomach rumbled loudly, reminding him that he had meditated through dinner. Minato allowed his head to go upwards as he let out a solid laugh. Let's see if we can find something to eat around here. I think one of those old shops I went past had old cups of ramen in them. The veggies might be off, but the noodles should still be good. Wouldn't want you going to bed on an empty stomach now. He looked back down at where his son was, or where he should have been, to see the boy had left his side. Looking up, all he could see was a dust cloud as Naruto sprinted towards ramen. Kids these days, he said with a chuckle as he put the crutch in place and began walking on his own down the barren street. Fugaku made his way through the office. It had been 3 years since he had taken the title as Hokage, and even though there was no celebration, the people he had passed in the streets had seemed rather cheery. He knew that was not because it was the anniversary of him becoming the Hokage, but the anniversary of the demon's death, the removal of fear from the streets. One of Fugaku's goals hadn't been achieved, however, with retrieving the scrolls from the Yondaime mansion to help strengthen the ninjas at his disposal. He had put forth the proposition to blow up the wall, but that had instantly been shot down by the council, saying that it would destroy a precious landmark. There had been some debacle with Yukihiro's daughter going missing along with several clan heads' daughters. When it was discovered that they had all taken a friendship with the demon child, it all became clear that they were off mourning somewhere. While Yukihiro demanded that Anbu squads be sent out to try and find them, the clan heads were happy to allow their children to settle out their sorrows before coming back in their own time. The topic died soon after, and every time Yukihiro tried to bring it up, the others didn't seem to care, as if they knew their kid was safe. Business within the village had blossomed to heights not seen since the Yondaime's death. Yet not once had it passed the lowest day the Yondaime had ever had in his position as the Hokage, simply because he was the most feared man in the world. That fear would be reignited when he stepped into his office to find a piece of paper nailed to the wall just above the Hokage's seat. Fugaku silently fumed. This meant that somebody was able to break into his office one way or another without any of the Anbu who stand guard having spotted them, by no means an easy task. However, it was what the paper was nailed into the wall with which really sent shivers down his spine. A 3-pronged kunai, used solely by the Yondaime. Get some Anbu and the police force in here now. He shouted at the assistant, who squeaked slightly in fear before rushing off to do her duty. Fugaku turned and tore the note off the wall and scanned it over. His eyes widened in anger as he scrunched the paper in his hand. Hokage, sir, what is it you need? Asked an Anbu who had appeared behind him. Fugaku pointed at the kunai embedded into the wall. That kunai, find out who put it there. Fingerprints, anything, those things haven't been touched in over a decade, said Fugaku in a serious tone. If this is some joke, there will be hell to pay. If not, then ensure no jobs are sent out today and have every shinobi armed for war. The following day was an awkward one as the shinobi waited on the outside of Konoha's walls, the citizens evacuated to the back corner to prevent any unnecessary casualties. Fugaku had taken the paper, and when no fingerprints had been found on the kunai, he had seen this as a sign of war. He had taken the paper and shown it to the council, who read it and reacted the same. Sume Inuzuka had sniffed it and been able to pick up a few hundred cents despite them all being similar. The actual note itself was stating that the true rulers of Konoha had come to take it back. That was all it said, and it managed to scare the crap out of some of the elders, believing that these people were here before Konoha was formed and had come back to take their sacred land back. So now all Chunin and above shinobi who hadn't been out on a mission now stood outside the front gates of Konoha, intent on either coming to some sort of agreement or fighting to protect their homes. Fugaku in his wisdom had had 4 platoons of Anbu hide along the forest path to pincer them if the need arose. "They're coming," said Sum, sniffing the air. Grabbing a telescope, Fugaku raised it to his eye and looked through it and cursed at the sheer number of people marching towards them, numbering somewhere just below a 500 roughly. "Seems they're serious," he said as they walked in perfect synchronicity towards them. "Sum, Hiashi, come with me and we'll see if we can settle this diplomatically without the need for bloodshed." Both representatives nodded before they leapt forward with the Hokage, finishing roughly halfway between the invading forces and Konoha. Likewise, the incoming army stopped their procession and 4 people made their way forward, each one wearing a mask and fully clothed, preventing anything being distinguished from their counterparts. In a war scenario, this made the battle incredibly dangerous, as it was difficult to see who was the biggest threat if they kept weaving in and out of one another. The only person that was truly distinguishable was the younger one, who was a couple of feet shorter than the others. "What is it that you come here seeking?" asked Fugaku, putting on a straight face, making sure that no emotion slipped through his features. "We've come to reclaim the seat of Hokage for those worthy of it. Our first job will be taking your ugly mug off the Hokage monument," said the one in the center. "How dare you insult the Hokage like that?" said Fugaku, fuming slightly. "Your army doesn't intimidate us in the slightest." "Damn, I thought it was a good idea," said the smaller one before he formed a single hand seal and all of the ninja who had remained behind burst in a puff of smoke. "That explains why they all smelled similar," said Sum, analyzing the situation. "The others though smell very familiar. Is this meant to be some kind of joke? You plan on attacking us with 4 people?" asked Hiashi, slightly annoyed. "If needs be we will attack you," said the one on the far right. "However, I for one would rather not spill family blood." "What do you mean?" asked Fugaku, prompting the man to take off his mask. "It's been a while, hasn't it, father?" said Itachi emotionlessly. "Itachi," said Fugaku in disbelief. "You are not fit to be Hokage, father, not even when a fixed execution is botched," said Itachi. "What the hell do you mean?" asked Fugaku, becoming infuriated. This prompted the smallest person to remove their mask. "Naruto," said Hiashi in disbelief as his jaw dropped. "In the flesh, and thanks to you, Fugaku, I've got this awful crick in my neck I can't get out," Naruto joked with a smile on his face. "It doesn't matter, boy, I still have the written contract stating how you killed the Sandame," said Fugaku as a wily smile spread across his face. It instantly dropped as the third person removed their mask. "What if said Sandame was still alive? I would think that contract becomes void," said Sarutobi, looking at Fugaku with cold eyes. Hiashi and Sum's jaws dropped as they tried to figure out what was going on in this situation. "That's not even the kicker," said Sarutobi as the 4th person removed their mask, causing Sum and Hiashi to get deathly pale as if they had seen a ghost. "Now are you going to give us our village back, or are we going to have to take it by force?" asked Minato. "One way or another you're going to die for framing my son over the attempted murder of the Sandame, an act done by your hand, testified by your son." Realizing he had been backed into a corner, Fugaku pushed his hands together to form a seal, but before his fingers could touch one another, a ball of chakra had been pressed into his stomach. "Enjoy this Rasengan in hell," said Minato as the resulting blast sent Fugaku flying backwards, his mangled body skidding across the road before coming to a stop, his eyes glazed over and lifeless. "Good job, Dad," said Naruto proudly. "Well done indeed, but how are we going to explain this to them?" said Sarutobi at the forces of Konoha charging towards them with the intention to deal revenge on the one who had killed their leader. Minato chuckled lightly as he rubbed the back of his head. "Yay, didn't think about that, did we?" he said, causing Itachi and Sarutobi to moan in sync. "Hey, it went a lot smoother than we thought it would, and because I'm feeling generous, I'll explain to the enraged masses what's just happened. Make sure they don't think it's a genjutsu," warned Itachi as Minato leapt forward, only to have to react and dodge the flood of shuriken which was sent in his direction. "Should we help him?" asked Naruto. "I didn't name him the 4th for no reason," said Sarutobi, enjoying watching his successor show the exact reason why he was given such a position. "Can somebody explain what's just happened?" asked Hiashi, snapping out of his shock. "You might want to wake her up first," said Naruto, pointing at Sume, who had fallen unconscious at one point or another. Noticing the Inuzuka clan's head unconscious on the ground, Hiashi knelt down and started fanning air into her face, trying to hasten the process of waking her up without making her angry. We might want to talk about what happened somewhere more comfortable. This is going to take a long time, said Sarutobi with a smile as he walked forward. Now that Minato had gotten the situation under control, Itachi and Naruto close behind